Mhm. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Cool. Well, hi, everybody. Again, I'm Eniola Abioye. I'm a senior UX researcher, and now I work at Facebook. But before I was at Facebook, I'm Yoruba, obviously, but I was born and raised here in the Bay Area. I was born in Oakland. So if you know, like San Francisco, I'm like 15 minutes away from San Francisco. I actually studied integrative biology in school. I went to UC Berkeley and was pre-med, trying to, appease my parents. But I was pre-med for a long time. So my background is actually in integrative biology. After leaving school, I started at a user research firm that works specifically with biotech companies, right? So I was understanding the different things that patients and doctors and caregivers were looking for as far as their experiences in different therapy areas, and then helping big biotech companies to build around that. And then I left there and I went to Kaiser Permanente, which is, I think, probably the largest healthcare organization here in the United States. And I was advancing their design thinking and human-centered design around change management and how they served all of the patients and doctors that worked in their organization. Then I left there and I moved on to conduct research and design research strategy at Silicon Valley Bank, which is it's a fintech company, and it's a bank that works with lots of startups across Silicon Valley. So now I've landed at Meta. I'm doing research with businesses and consumers, and it's been a lot of fun. Have learned a lot, and along the way, working in different organizations, I've learned a lot about how we use UX research to stand up and kind of like advocate for the users that we're serving. Okay, so today I'll talk a little bit about human-centered design, the basics of it, and like where design thinking comes from and what's at the root of it and why we do what we do. And then I'll go into some ways that we use to understand users. And then on the other end of it, once we've done the research to understand, what users want and the kind of experiences that we should build for them, understanding how do we help our organizations use that and turn that into user-centered product. Because that's a huge part of our job too. Like, obviously we talk to folks and we understand things, but we also have to hold our companies accountable. I'll talk through moments that matter, and then we'll walk through a really simple case study that I did years ago. And I tell people all the time, like, you don't have to have a full-time position in order to do UX research or to do UX or to understand a user type. So we'll walk through just a really simple one and a journey map. Okay, so let's get started. So human-centered design. At the basics of it, human-centered design says that when we're building something for someone, or when we're designing a product or a service or a program, it makes sense to ask the person who's going to use the product or the program what they would like to see, right? It makes sense to involve them in the process of building out the experience that they're going to use because it's for them, right? So not building something for someone without them, right? Or incorporating them into that process, bringing their voice into the room as much as possible is at the core of human-centered design, and it's why we do it. In getting to know users and understand what they want, we're able to prioritize what users want and what we build and how we build it. And I think over time, this has become more and more important because as innovation grows and more companies are out there and there's more competition, companies are realizing, okay, we can't just build something that's good enough, or we can't just build something that does something, because there's going to be another company who innovates around, okay, well, how can we do this better? Or how can we make this more user-centered, right? So I've seen UX grow so much over the past, 10 years. As an industry right now, it's hot right now because companies are realizing, okay, we have to dig in and build exactly what users want in order to attract people to stay and remain, right, with a certain company or service. So some ways that we do it and like incorporate user-centered design is through co-design, right? So like having sprints where we're working with prototypes and we allow users to kind of get their hands dirty and build things and imagine and brainstorm with us. We do something called rapid testing and iteration, or RITE. So rapid testing and iteration is essentially saying that instead of, building this big thing, so say we're building a car, instead of building the car, end to end and then putting it in front of users and hoping that they really love it, instead of like building all at once and then testing later, we should build a little bit, test it, build a little bit, test it, build a little bit, test it, and do this over and over again so that there are no surprises when we get to the final test or when we're going to release a product, because we've tested it all throughout. And then the last thing is validation. So putting it in front of users to understand, like, what are your jobs to be done, or what are you trying to do when you're using a product like this? And are you able to do that well in what we've built, right? Did we take what we heard that you wanted in an experience, and did we build the right thing? Or are we on track for building the thing that you want? Okay. When it comes to user research, there are 5 key phases that we go through when we're working to support a product team. So the first thing is to empathize with our users, right? And the easiest way to empathize with users is to get to know them a little bit. So whether we're doing in-depth interviews, whether we're doing ethnographies where we're going and we're going into their home and asking them to show us how they use certain things, and making sure that they're kind of comfortable sharing how this product or service or piece of information would impact their lives. And then sharing that with companies, because a lot of times humans can be really self-centered, right? So we'll build things that we think are great or that we would enjoy using, but as we're not the end user all the time. And so it's super important to get out of your head and go to talk to the end user to understand what it is that they want and how they would use the product that you're proposing, right? Then the next step is to kind of define, right? So that's honing in and figuring out what our scope is of what is the user problem that we're trying to solve. What are the questions people have? What are current experiences now? And what kind of value can we add on top of that at the point where users are looking for value, right? One thing I'll say over and over during this presentation is that a lot of times companies will build a thing and they'll say, oh, this is really, really great. How do we get people to use it, right? And I'll say that I've seen that it's a lot harder to do it that way instead of the other way around, of empathizing with users and figuring out what their user problems are and then building something to meet that need, right? Because changing behavior is something that's going to take you a lot of time and cost you a lot of money, right? And at the end of the day, might not work out. But if you're finding the user problems that people have expressed that they want to see different or want help with, then you're not going to have to figure out how to get them to use it. They're going to use it if you present that value. The third thing we do is ideate. And this is really just like brainstorming and kind of like going through a design sprint to understand, like, based on the problems that we've defined in the previous phase, what can we do about it? How might we allow users to have a better experience in this scope of their journey? Then we move on to prototyping. So building little by little, right? Starting out with low fidelity prototypes and understanding like how those work or how users like them. Do they like the concept of what we're thinking about? Is it something that they can see themselves using? And then prototype is actually a phase we stay in for a long time. Like when it comes to these 5 phases of UX research, they're not linear. They're not neat and, okay, I'm going to do this step and then this step. Sometimes you go into define and then you ideate and then you go back to define and then you prototype a little bit, you go back to ideate and back to define. And then testing and iterating. Once you've built the thing that is informed by users, testing it out to see if folks like it, and then iterating to fix the kinks in it or make it even better. Okay, so when it comes to understanding users, there are so many ways to do it, and I really like to get creative in this process, and then also incorporate as much as possible my cross-functional team, because they're able to empathize with users more, the more they're able to hear what they want and what they need directly from their mouths, right? So incorporating your cross-functional team is always going to be really helpful when you're looking to understand users. So first, when it comes to UX research, and trying to understand like what we know about our users currently and what we want to know, UX research and data analysis should work really, really closely, because there's so much story and there's so much narrative about what users want and like and dislike in the data, in the back-end numbers of what's happening. So if I work with the data analysis and I ask like, how often do users come to this page through this pathway, right? Or how often do users click this button? Or how often do users start a process on the website and then fall off, right? Because that'll tell me where there are different moments that matter to me, right? So where are there friction points that we need to improve and make better? Where there are delight points where people go to very often, right? So working really closely with data analysis to understand what are the numbers saying, and then how do we fill in the gaps with UX research is going to be really important when it comes to understanding folks. Yeah, the second thing I'll say is literature review is huge. When it comes to research and serving customers, there's been so much done, right? There's so much knowledge out there about what people want and how people want it to look and the different things that we want to do. And of course, there's always going to be new questions, but there have been similar questions answered somewhere by somebody, right? So before I start any research project, I look into, okay, well, what do we know already? And what can we use as far as information from previous studies to build our knowledge and context for something new that we're building. I look at usability. So you can build a really, really great product or a really great website, but if it's not intuitive, or if folks don't know how to use it really quickly, then it's not going to be used, right? We know now that consumers or like many users don't like to have to read a bunch of instructions or really any instructions to figure out how to use something. And so it's going to be really important to understand how to make something as useful and intuitive and easy to use right off the bat without any type of training or reading instructions. And that's going to stick out to users, right? That's going to set a product apart. Accessibility, of course, is super important. And I think as UXers, we're really uniquely positioned kind of at the forefront of interfacing directly with customers and users to understand like what is going to make something accessible to them, or what is going to make something feel good, or feel like it's something that they can use or meets their need. And so it's really our responsibility to go back into our organizations or, you know, whoever we're working with as far as building the product to drive accessibility in what we're building, and make sure that like, hey, these people, these use cases, or these people who are at the margins or have different accessibility needs, they should also feel free to use this product. And so if we're not building for them, we're narrowing our scope too much and we're not building broadly enough. Okay. And then the last thing I'll say is heuristics. Like there's so much we know about what humans like in general. So it's not that every question that comes up, we have to go in and do a user research study, right? I don't have to do user research to tell you people don't like crowded pages, right? Or people don't want to feel like bogged down or overwhelmed by information jumping out from a page to them. People like clean, people like easy to navigate, people like you know, things that are laid out and organized really well so it's digestible, right? So when those kinds of questions come up, it's our responsibility to say, like, based on heuristics or based on what we know about users in general or best practices in building and designing, these are things that we should prioritize in the product. Okay. I wanted to talk about methods because, like I said, there's so many ways to conduct user research or to get to know our users. There's a difference between behavioral methods and attitudinal methods. And even though ideally it shouldn't be this way, oftentimes there's a difference between what people demonstrate, or like if you put them in a situation, what people choose or what people prefer when something's in front of them and they actually have to take an action, versus what people say they will like or say they won't like, or preferences that they describe when there's not a prototype or something physical to interact with. So this method, this graph is from NNG. or Nielsen Norman Group, who is an OG educator as far as UX research specifically. They've been around for so many decades. And so they've tracked kind of the user research methods or the ways to engage with our users or learn about our users by how behavioral versus attitudinal it is. So how, you know, we usually start out asking users kind of what they'll want and to think about out loud with us what would meet their needs. And then we move into, okay, well, like now we have something that's low fidelity or mid fidelity. How does this meet your need, right? So attitudinal, what they say they'll want, and then behavioral, kind of what they demonstrate or showcase that they want when they're able to interact with something. The x-axis on this is qualitative, which is direct and like focusing on a smaller number of people, but going more in depth as far as information that you're gathering from them. And then quantitative, so indirect in the sense that you're speaking to a much larger population and kind of skimming the top of understanding what their motivations and needs are. And you're not going as deep because you're not able to connect with people one-on-one, but still very, very useful when it comes time for it. So I wanted to point out journey mapping, since this is what we're talking through today. Journey mapping isn't on the graph, but it sits in the attitudinal space, right? So we're understanding what user journeys are by asking them, kind of tell me about the last time you did this, or tell me about what your journey looks like as you're doing this. And then it sits in the qualitative attitudinal space. So it's a really good way to kind of start out, and before we design anything or before we even brainstorm, let's see what the journey looks like and where there are points of contention, where there are pain points, and where there's the most opportunity to make a difference in the user's experience. Really quickly, Eric, I'm getting a 3 minutes left warning. So just wanted to make you aware of that.
Sure, definitely. We can still continue.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So when it comes to building user-centered products, this is with product at the center, right? There's a cyclical nature of how UX research will impact OKRs, or the objectives and key results of an organization, right? So when you're working at an organization or you're building something for someone, or you're working in UX research or UX design or content strategy, you're going to have to understand the product team that you're working on. What are the objectives and key results, right? How is the business looking to make money? What's the business's goals as far as, are we looking to have more users? Are we looking for a different type of user? Are we looking to diversify our users? So the understanding the objectives and key results is something that's going to be important for every UXer. And then based on those objectives, we feed that into the type of UX research that we're going to do, because we need to understand the metrics that our company is looking to measure, right? What does good look like? What does bad look like? What does improvement look like based on what we've done before? And so that should influence the UX research and the type of questions that I'm asking based on the information the company needs, right? So then, of course, the research insights that come out of the research that I do, those should be will be shared with the company, right? But those should also influence what the company's goals are, right? So if the company is saying, hey, we want to have different types of users in different countries, right? I'll do UX research to understand, like, what does expansion look like, or what does interest look like across different landscapes or across different key markets. The insights that I get should then influence what our objectives are. So say the insights that I get are, there's a lot of interest for this type of product in markets like Asia, in Australia, in Latin America. So then that should influence our objectives in the sense that maybe we target our efforts in those places. So on a smaller scale, when we're working on product teams, it's also our responsibility as UX researchers or UXers in general to really hold product teams accountable to build the best experience for our users, right? So we're putting in the effort to understand, what do users want and how do we build the absolute best products? But at the end of the day, once the research is done and the presentation is nice and delivered, that's only half of our job, right? because it's going to take socialization and kind of pushing for the companies to meet the need that we've uncovered, right? We can't just know it and then we continue to build what we wanted to build. We have to build around what we just learned. So here are some ways that I hold product teams accountable when, after I've done